Hey there, guys. Today I'm going to be talking about gender and sexuality. And before we begin, I have a couple of key terms that I want to define. The first of which is actually gender. And gender is just what it means to be male or female in the context of society or a culture, not what it means to be biologically male or female. Society is just a collection of individuals in an organized community. Gender norms are the norms that the community has decided upon based on what the roles of males and females should be. So, for example, something like a woman wearing a dress is fine, but a man wearing a dress is against those norms, for instance. Now, sexuality is defined as an individual's sexual preference or orientation. And the last key term on this list kind of doesn't seem like it belongs here, but this is what I'm going to be talking about most, and it's actually evolution. And evolution is just the process by which organisms are either diversified or developed over a long period of time. Now, historically, evolution has shaped pretty much all the decisions that we have to this day. Just to use an example from the animal kingdom, in the lion community, the lionesses are actually the ones who go out and hunt for the food. So once they bring the kill home, it's then the male lions who have first dibs on that food. Now that kind of seems a little contrived that women would do the work and then the male lion would get the first dibs, but that's their reality. You know, they've come to that way of life over a very long period of time, and that's how they've decided to live, for better or for worse. Now, the truth for humans is that since we've evolved from great apes, you know, we evolved from a very community-driven species. They're very family-oriented, and you know, so are we. But after the discovery of fire making, we sort of created this hunter-gatherer tribe where, you know, we would like go out and hunt for meat and then bring it back home, cook it, process it, save it for later. And that created, based on the rules necessary for that way of life, we've created masculinity and femininity. Masculinity is defined by the ability to run for long distances, to travel for long distances, to have the physique necessary to hunt large game. So you know, the power that you need to, you know, pull a bow to shoot an animal is much more than a female would need, for instance, to raise a baby, to, you know, perform household tasks like sweeping and, you know, cleaning or bringing clean water to the house. I'm talking about, you know, hunter-gatherer tribes at this point. And it's not necessarily something that I agree with or disagree with, but that's the reality that we came to. You know, for over a long period of time, humans' decision to remain consistent, and any organism's decision to remain consistent, shapes how they create their culture, essentially. And so instead of, you know, creating a culture based on women hunting first, you know, men just took up the role, and ever since, that's what our reality has been. Another example would be something like a lawyer suddenly deciding to change careers to an architect. Like that might be realistic, but odds are they're not going to do that, simply because they've already been through X years of law school, and to look at another X number of years in architect school is a crazy amount of work involved. And that's not necessarily unrealistic, but it's also unrealistic to expect that from everyone, you know, in the context of accepting gender norms or sexuality differences. You know, that requires work from every single individual to get to the point where it becomes a social norm or a gender norm. The word norm means that it's accepted by all of society. So to get to that point requires every single person to be involved. And that brings us to the present, where after this enormous history of hunting and gathering, and, you know, even up until the colonization of Europe and then the colonization into America, that still created the nuclear family, which was the male breadwinner, the female child rearer, and the children who are expected to take on the role of both, or of either male or female, based on what their gender was. So if a male child is expected to follow in the father's footsteps, and there's no room for you know, differences there, where does that leave the child? If a child is born homosexual, you know, where does that leave him as far as wanting to express himself? You know, that's the problem that we get to, or the problem that I'm trying to discuss here. For example, my father thought for a very long time that homosexuality was wrong, but that was simply because his parents, who were simple farmers, were taught by their parents and their parents before that it was wrong. You know, there was no necessarily logical basis for it. It was just that it was a belief passed down through generations. You know, it was evolved through this generational period, up until my father took the idea. And, you know, since marrying my mother, he's gotten a lot more of experiences. He's, you know, changed his views since. He accepts all sexualities now. He's very forward thinking, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that if he had been left alone on his own devices, his thoughts would not have changed, and he may have gone on to influence others. If he hadn't married my mother and had a child with another woman, he may have told that child that being a homosexual was wrong, and if that child had been homosexual, that would have been very damaging to him. And so parents who don't accept sexuality differences, can do a lot of damage to children who want to express themselves in different ways. So, giving a child a football when they want to play with Barbies, that may seem like this monumental decision to a father, but it's really not to a small child. Like, they're not going to become homosexual because they played with Barbies. That's a whole other thing. And like, biologically, homosexuality has a disadvantage for not passing on their genes, but that was only important in small tribes where population was necessary to carry on their way of life. So small tribes in the forest, they need the manpower to do certain tasks. Otherwise, they can just their way of life falls apart. But to some extent nowadays, you've created these incredibly stable cultures that doesn't necessarily rely on the billions that we already have. We can operate our society based on a billion less. So to pass on your genes is not necessarily the culmination of your life's work, so to speak. You can still, for instance, I don't know, adopt a child as a homosexual couple and still teach him the things that you would teach your biological son without the necessity of passing on your genes. So socially, it doesn't even really matter. And we've gotten to this social culture where the only reason that we don't accept homosexuality is either A, based on past viewpoints, or B, based on the desire to remain socially acceptable. And so when the social norm is such that homosexuality is wrong, you're going to continue to think that way. It takes a lot of determination to think outside the box when every other person, or you perceive every other person on Earth, thinking in a certain way. And so as a species with the most higher brain functioning on Earth, it's kind of, we have both the ability and the disability to accept homosexuality or any other sexuality. And that kind of leads me to my final question here, guys. If you have a problem with someone's sexuality, is that your own problem, or is that a problem defined by your parents and their parents before them and simply imparted on you? And if that's the case, why do you still believe that? There's no reason to in our society anymore. It's time to challenge beliefs. It's time to change how things work. And it's time to accept everyone simply for who they are. Thank you guys for listening.